In the previous video, I began introducing you to the idea of experiments. The primary purpose of an experiment is to establish a cause and effect relationship among an explanatory and response variable, which in experiments we can call an independent and dependent variable. Now we want to actually look at some experimental designs. Here are the design elements of strong experiments. There are at least two conditions, one of which is called a treatment group because it receives the treatment, another which is called a comparison or control group. For example, if a pharmaceutical company wants to check the efficacy of a new drug to treat a disease, they could give some individuals in the treatment group the treatment, that is, the new drug. Other individuals in the control group could be given a non-drug, which in medicine is often called a placebo, that is, something like a sugar pill. It looks exactly the same as the drug, but there is no drug in it. Then what we do is we control as many extraneous variables as possible. So in that example, we would want to, for instance, consider extraneous variables like what is the status of the disease? We certainly don't want those with a disease that is more pronounced, that is longer term, that has taken more hold on a body. We don't want that to be one group, and then the other group, it's a disease that just had early onset. We would want to make sure that we control for an extraneous variable such as the length of time of the disease or the level of the disease in the body. We would want to make sure that the similar levels or the spectrum is available in both the treatment and control groups. We randomize to eliminate systematic bias from other extraneous variables. This is powerful. And notice the word randomization. It does not mean random sampling. Randomization means that we randomly put into two or more conditions. So we could have a convenience sample of individuals. Let's say we have 40 of them in a convenience sample, and we can randomly assign 20 of them to the treatment and 20 of them to the control. The idea of random assignment is that you're not systematically biasing one group or the other because you're letting random processes decide who's in which condition. You should, through randomization, get two conditions that are very similar in terms of where they are on all the different extraneous variables. In the example I gave of length of time that someone has had a disease, if I randomize a sample of individuals with a disease to conditions, it's very unlikely that I'm going to give everyone with the more pronounced levels of the disease in one condition. Rather, they're going to be randomly distributed among the treatment and control conditions. And then finally, the final thing we have to have, the fourth item for a strong experiment, is replication of units to reduce chance variation in group statistics. What we just mean by that is we're not just going to compare one person to one person. We want to have as many individuals in each of the groups as is feasible in order to enhance our study. But even if we have only 10 people, that's replication. If we have 5 individuals in the treatment and 5 in the control, that's some replication of units. So we don't want just one individual in each condition. We want to replicate among units. Okay, so with that in mind, let's look at some examples. First is what is called the completely randomized design. Participants are randomized to every combination of factors. Now, what do I mean here by factors? I mean the explanatory variables. And they're randomized to the levels within the factors, that is, the different categories of the explanatory variable. Then the differences in outcomes will be due to either the explanatory variable or just chance. So let's look at this example here. In this case, I have two factors. We're looking at the effects of advertising. One factor is how long is the ad? And there's two possibilities here, what I'm calling two levels. There's either a 30-second ad or a 90-second ad. So here we're looking to see if the length of the ad can influence the response of the person watching it. So the explanatory variable here is the advertising length. But there's another factor I put in this example to show you that we can use more than one explanatory variable. How many times the individual watches the ad. Maybe they watch it one time. Maybe we show them 2 times over the course of a week or a couple weeks. Maybe we show them 3 times over the course of a week or a couple weeks. So how many times they see the ad, does that influence their response? Now notice when we combine these two factors, we actually end up with 6 possible conditions. 30 seconds one time, 30 seconds 2 times, 30 seconds 3 times, 90 seconds one time, 90 seconds 2 times, 90 seconds 3 times. When we randomize to conditions, let's say we have 60 individuals, if we randomly select 10 people for one time with 30 seconds, and then another 10 for 2 times with 30 seconds, and so on, until every one of these little 6 blocks here is filled with 10 people, then we have a completely randomized design. That is, we randomize to all the different factors, and we did it randomly. That's what it means to be randomized, to all those different factors. It's a very strong design. Another design is a matching or block design. Now what we do here is we control one of the extraneous variables. We control by splitting up on that extraneous variable or dividing on that extraneous variable and then randomize to conditions. So in this case, I have a sample. And I think that maybe gender might be related to the response. So if I think gender is related to the response, that's an extraneous variable. Well, guess what I can do? I can divide on gender, so I have men and I have women, and then I can separately assign to treatment and control condition for men and treatment and control condition for women. What will that get me? That will get me a treatment that has men in it, a treatment that has women in it. It will get me a control that has men in it and control that has women. So I have made sure that not all the men are in the treatment condition and the women in the control, or vice versa. I have randomly assigned after splitting into these two conditions. Now it's easy to confuse this with stratified sampling, but we're not sampling based upon men and women. We already have a sample. We're stratifying now after we have a sample and putting these individuals into what we call blocks. So the extraneous variable gender is taken care of. How about the other extraneous variables? They're handled through randomization to the treatment control conditions. Additional considerations in experimental design. Control conditions should be comparisons to something rather than nothing. A placebo effect, that's the effect of just knowing you're in an experiment, can influence results. Double-blind studies, what does that mean? That means that the researcher doesn't do the randomization. He gets someone else or she gets someone else to do that for them, so that the individual doesn't know whether they're in the treatment and the control, and neither does the researcher. It prevents researcher bias. Experimental findings may be difficult to replicate in practical settings, so for this reason, an experiment is understanding cause and effect, but then we have to have additional steps later to see, can we see this same cause effect in a more applied setting? It's like we begin in the laboratory, but then later on we might want to find out if it can be put to practical use. Experimental design. the key elements. We have to have more than one condition. We have to use randomization. We have to control as many extraneous variables as possible through randomization or other means, such as stratifying our sample before we assign to conditions. And we have to have replications. We can't just put one unit in the treatment and one in the control. We have to have multiple units in each.